What would you do if the man you loved, the man whose child you were carrying, looked you in the eye and told you to make the baby disappear? What would you do if he changed the locks, canceled your credit cards, and put everything you owned in 4 cardboard boxes in the lobby while the doorman stared at the floor? What would you do if his mistress called you a servant at a party in front of 300 people and not one single person in that room said a word? Elena Marsh knows exactly what that feels like. She was a nurse from Kentucky with no family, no money, and no one to call. She signed a contract to be a billionaire's fake wife for 18 months. She was supposed to take the money and disappear. But then she made the mistake of falling in love. And then she got pregnant. And then everything she thought was real turned out to be a lie. What happens next will make you angry. It will make you cry. And the ending, I promise you, the ending will make you stand up and cheer. Because the same father-in-law who watched in silence for years finally walked up to a podium, pulled out a leather folder, and handed his pregnant daughter-in-law the deed to every house his son had locked her out of, in front of 300 people, in front of the mistress, in front of everyone. This story carries a message that every woman needs to hear. Your worth is not determined by the people who discard you. It is determined by the moments when you refuse to be discarded. Elena signed a contract because she was desperate, but desperation does not define you. What defines you is what you do when the person with all the power tells you that you are nothing, and you look down at your belly, and you whisper, "I will see you in court." Strength is not about never falling. It is about knowing that the fall is not the end of your story. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about someone you know who needed to hear it, do me a small favor. Hit that like button so the story can reach the women who need it most tonight. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have signed that contract? Would you have walked into that gala? I read every single comment, and your words keep this channel alive. And if you are new here, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Because we bring you stories like this every single week. Stories about women who were told they were nothing and proved the whole world wrong. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder that she is enough. Because she is, and so are you. Now, let us begin. It started with 2 pink lines on a Tuesday morning. Elena Marsh was 34 years old, and she had spent her entire life learning one lesson over and over again. Do not depend on anyone. The lesson started early. She was born in a hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, to a mother who signed the relinquishment papers before Elena was 3 days old. No father listed on the birth certificate, no grandparents who came forward, no one. She grew up in foster care, 7 homes in 14 years. Some were fine, most were not. One was bad enough that she still could not sleep with the bedroom door closed. She learned to keep her head down, her grades up, and her expectations low. She learned that the only person who would ever save Elena Marsh was Elena Marsh. She put herself through nursing school at the University of Louisville on a patchwork of scholarships, Pell Grants, and overnight shifts at a gas station off Interstate 64. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in nursing, then completed her nurse practitioner certification while working full-time at a community hospital in Louisville. By the time she moved to New York City at 29, she had a career, a purpose, and $94,000 in student loan debt that sat on her chest like a stone every single night. But she was proud. She had done it alone. She had proven every caseworker, every foster parent, every teacher who looked at her with pity instead of expectation absolutely wrong. And then she broke the only promise she had ever made to herself. It happened on a Thursday evening in the parking lot of Mount Sinai, Brooklyn, where Elena worked as a nurse practitioner in the emergency department. She had just finished a double shift, 16 hours on her feet, a car accident victim who did not make it, a 4-year-old with a broken arm whose mother kept apologizing for not watching him closely enough. Elena had held the woman's hand and told her it was not her fault, because that was what Elena did. She took care of people, even when no one had ever taken care of her. She was walking to her car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for 6 months, when a man in a gray suit stepped out from beside a black sedan. He was polite, professional. He said his name was Raymond Holt, and that he represented a client who had a business proposition for her. He said the word business the way some people say the word opportunity, like it was supposed to make your heart beat faster. Elena told him she was not interested and kept walking. Raymond Holt followed her. Not aggressively, just persistently. He said his client was willing to pay $1.5 million for 18 months of her time. He said the arrangement was legal, confidential, and would require nothing that violated her personal boundaries. Elena stopped walking, not because of the money, although $94,000 in debt will make any number with the word million in it sound like a church bell. She stopped because Raymond Holt said something that cut through her exhaustion and her skepticism and her bone-deep distrust of men in expensive suits. He said, quote, "My client needs someone with no family connections, no social media presence, and no one who will ask questions. You fit the profile perfectly," end quote. No family connections, no one who will ask questions. He was describing her life like it was a qualification, and the worst part was that he was right. She told him no. She went home to her studio apartment in Flatbush, ate leftover pasta standing over the sink, and went to bed. The next week, her landlord raised the rent by $400 a month. The week after that, her car finally died. The engine did not just fail, it seized. The mechanic told her it would cost $3,200 to fix, or she could sell it for scrap for about $500. She sold it for scrap. Then the hospital cut her hours. Budget constraints, they said. Restructuring. She went from 5 shifts a week to 3. Her income dropped by 40% overnight. And then Raymond Holt came back. This time, he brought a folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 columns. On the left side, every debt Elena owed: student loans, credit card balances, the medical bill from an emergency room visit 2 years ago that insurance had only partially covered. The total at the bottom was circled in red ink: $106,412. On the right side was a single number: $1.5 million. Below it, one sentence: 18 months. Then you are free. She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. But Elena Marsh had spent 32 years being strong, being independent, being the person who never asked anyone for anything. And she was so tired. She was so deeply, profoundly tired of fighting every single day just to stay in the same place. She signed. The man who needed a wife was Grant Davenport, 38 years old, CEO of Davenport Capital, third-generation wealth out of Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of handsome that looked effortless but was actually the product of expensive dermatologists, personal trainers, and a jawline that had been winning genetic lotteries for 3 generations. Grant Davenport was charming, not charming the way a good friend is charming, where you feel warm and comfortable. Charming the way a magician is charming, where you are so busy watching the hand that is moving that you forget to watch the hand that is not. He needed a wife because his grandfather, the original Davenport, had written a morality clause into the family trust. The clause stated that any male heir must be in a, quote, stable committed marriage, end quote, for a minimum of 12 consecutive months before his 38th birthday in order to access his share of the trust. Grant's share was approximately $2.3 billion. No wife, no money. It was that simple. Grant could not marry someone from his social circle. Too many questions, too many connections, too much risk that the arrangement would leak. He needed someone invisible, someone disposable, someone with no family who would show up at Thanksgiving asking uncomfortable questions, someone with no friends who ran in the same circles, someone who would take the money, sign the NDA, and disappear, someone exactly like Elena. The first 3 months were mechanical. Elena moved into the penthouse on the Upper East Side and was given a closet full of clothes she had not chosen, a schedule of events she was expected to attend, and a set of rules she was expected to follow. Smile in photographs. Do not drink more than 1 glass of wine at public events. Do not discuss your background. Do not form personal relationships with anyone in the Davenport social circle. She and Grant slept in separate bedrooms. They spoke at breakfast the way coworkers speak in an elevator, polite, distant, functional. Then it changed. It was the small things that undid her. Grant brought her coffee one morning without being asked. Not just any coffee. Her exact order: oat milk latte, 1 pump of vanilla, extra hot. She had never told him her coffee order. He had simply noticed. He remembered that she hated lilies. She had mentioned it once, jour de sens, casually, at a dinner party when someone complimented the centerpiece. She said lilies reminded her of a funeral. She did not say whose funeral. He did not ask. But a week later, every flower arrangement in the penthouse was changed to peonies and hydrangeas. He never mentioned it. She noticed. One night during a thunderstorm in October, the power went out in the entire building. Elena was in her bedroom, reading by the light of her phone, when she heard a knock on her door. Grant was standing in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. They sat on the kitchen floor in the dark and ate cold pizza from a box that had been in the refrigerator since the night before. He told her about his mother, Catherine, how she died of pancreatic cancer when he was 12, how his father stopped talking for almost a year afterward, how the house in Greenwich became so quiet that Grant used to turn on every television on every floor just to fill the silence. Elena told him about the foster homes, not the bad ones, the one good one, the couple in Bowling Green who had a dog named Biscuit and a garden full of tomatoes and who called her sweetheart like they meant it. She was with them for 11 months before the husband got transferred to a job in another state and they could not take her with them. She was 9 years old. She never forgot the way the woman hugged her on the last day and whispered, quote, "I am so sorry, baby. I wish things were different," end quote. Grant listened. He did not try to fix it. He did not say something empty like, "That must have been hard." He just sat with her in the dark and let the silence be enough. That was the night Elena started to fall. The night she knew she was in real trouble was in Vermont. A weekend donor retreat at a converted inn near Stowe. After the last event ended, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching snow fall through the pine trees. The other guests had gone to bed. The world was quiet. Grant looked at her and said 4 words that she would replay in her mind 10,000 times over the next year. "I did not plan on you." They slept together that night. His bedroom, not hers. And afterward, he held her in a way that did not feel contractual. It felt like a man holding someone he did not want to let go of. They slept together many nights after that. The separate bedrooms became a formality. Her toothbrush migrated to his bathroom. His shirts appeared in her closet. They developed routines. Saturday morning farmer's market, Sunday evening cooking together. He was terrible at chopping vegetables and laughed about it. And his laugh was different when it was real, softer, less practiced. Elena fell in love with her husband. She believed, with the desperate certainty of a woman who had never been loved before, that he fell in love with her too. She was wrong. The contract was scheduled to end in 3 weeks when Elena found out she was pregnant. 8 weeks along, she had been so busy, so distracted by the life she was living, that she had not noticed the missed period until the nausea started. She stood in the bathroom of the penthouse on a Tuesday morning, holding a pregnancy test in hands that would not stop shaking, and she felt two things simultaneously: terror and hope. Because if Grant loved her, if what they had was real, then this baby was not an accident. It was a beginning. She decided to tell him that evening. She spent the afternoon cooking beef Wellington, his favorite, from a recipe she had practiced 3 times before getting it right. She set the table with the good china. She even bought candles, which she never did, because candles felt like trying too hard, and Elena had spent her whole life trying not to try too hard. But before Grant came home, she went into his office to look for a wine opener. She did not find the wine opener. She found something else: a notarized document labeled Termination of Marriage Agreement, with a payout date set for 21 days from that day. Next to it, a printed email from Grant's attorney. The email read, quote, "Per your instructions, Ms. Marsh's NDA has been finalized. Once she signs the termination documents, all ties are severed. The Brittany situation can proceed publicly after a 60-day cooling period." End quote. The Brittany situation. Elena read the email 3 times. Her hands moved to her stomach without her telling them to. She could smell the beef Wellington burning slightly in the kitchen. She could hear the front door opening. She could hear Grant's shoes on the marble floor. She walked downstairs. She did not mention the document. She did not mention the email. She stood in the kitchen doorway and said 6 words. "Grant, I am pregnant. It is yours." His expression did not change. That was the thing she would remember most clearly in the months that followed. His face did not move. Not a flicker of surprise, not a flash of joy, not even anger. Nothing. He looked at her the way you would look at an invoice with an unexpected line item. He set down his briefcase. He loosened his tie. He said, quote, "That is not part of the agreement, Elena." End quote. She started talking. Fast, the way people talk when they can feel the ground shifting under their feet. She said this changed things. She said what they had was real. She said the contract did not matter anymore because something bigger had happened, something that could not be reduced to signatures and payout dates. He let her finish. Then he said, quote, "We have a contract, and the contract ends in 3 weeks. I will add $500,000 to your settlement if you handle this quietly. That is more than generous." End quote. Handle this. He said, handle this the way you would say, handle the dry cleaning, or handle the reservation. He meant the baby. Elena said no. Grant nodded. Not the nod of a man who had been refused, the nod of a man who had expected this answer and had already planned for it. He picked up his phone and walked into his office and closed the door. What happened next took 72 hours. At the 12-hour mark, Elena's name was removed from every joint bank account. Her credit cards, all issued under Grant's accounts, were canceled. She tried to buy groceries on the way home from work, and her card was declined in front of the cashier and 4 other customers. At the 24-hour mark, the car was repossessed. It was registered in Grant's name, like everything else. A tow truck came to the hospital's parking lot in the middle of the day and hooked up the black Audi that Elena had been driving for 18 months. Her colleagues watched from the break room window. One of them, a nurse named Deborah, who had always been kind to her, came outside and said, quote, "Elena, is everything okay?" End quote. Elena smiled and said it was a mix-up and walked to the subway. At the 36-hour mark, she came home from a 12-hour shift to find the penthouse locks changed. Her belongings, everything she had brought, and everything she had accumulated in 18 months of playing house, were in 4 cardboard boxes stacked in the lobby. The doorman, Eddie, who had called her Mrs. D every morning for a year and a half, who saved her a copy of the newspaper because he knew she liked the crossword puzzle, would not look at her. He stared at the floor while she stood there, pregnant, exhausted, trying to understand what was happening. She said, "Eddie, what is going on?" He said, "I am sorry, Mrs. D. I have my orders." At the 48-hour mark, a courier arrived at the hospital with a legal letter on the letterhead of Davenport Capital's law firm. The letter stated that Elena had 14 days to vacate all Davenport-affiliated properties, which she had already been locked out of, and sign the NDA, or Grant's legal team would pursue action for, quote, breach of contractual obligations, end quote. 14 days. NDA. Breach of contract. These were the words used to describe the erasure of a pregnant woman from a marriage she thought was real. Elena stood on the sidewalk outside the Davenport building at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. It was March. The temperature was 31 degrees. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She had 2 suitcases, one rolling and one with a broken zipper that she had to hold closed with her hand. She had $1,143 in her personal checking account. She had a phone with a battery at 12% and not a single person in the world to call. She walked 6 blocks to the hospital. She used her badge, which still worked because the suspension had not started yet, to get into the on-call room. She lay down on the narrow cot that smelled like disinfectant and instant coffee. She put her hand on her stomach. She was not showing yet. It was too early for that. But she put her hand there anyway, because it was the only thing in her life that was real. She whispered into the dark room, "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will figure this out." The next morning, she threw up in the staff bathroom, washed her face with paper towels, put on a clean pair of scrubs from the supply closet, and worked a 12-hour shift. She started an IV on a 60-year-old man having a heart attack. She sutured a laceration on a teenager who had fallen off his skateboard. She held the hand of a woman in labor who had no one else with her. She did her job, because that was what Elena Marsh did. She survived. But surviving and living are not the same thing. And Elena was about to learn that Grant Davenport was not finished with her. He was just getting started. Elena had one friend in New York City. One real friend. Not a colleague who said, "Let us get lunch sometime," and never followed through. Not a neighbor who smiled in the elevator. One person who knew who she actually was. Her name was Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was 36 years old, a family law attorney who worked at a mid-size firm in Midtown, and she was the kind of person who took up space in a room the way a thunderstorm takes up space in the sky. Loud, electric, impossible to ignore. They met 2 years earlier when Vanessa came into the emergency room at Mount Sinai, Brooklyn, with a broken wrist from a kickboxing class. Elena was her nurse. While Elena was wrapping the splint, Vanessa told her the entire story of how she had been trying to throw a left hook when her foot slipped on a sweaty mat and she went down like, quote, a baby giraffe on an ice rink, end quote. Elena laughed so hard she almost dropped the splint. Vanessa noticed that Elena's laugh was the kind that sounded surprised, like she was not used to doing it. She asked Elena if she wanted to get coffee sometime. Elena said she did not have time. Vanessa said, "I did not ask if you had time. I asked if you wanted to." They became friends, real friends. The kind of friends who text each other at midnight about nothing and show up with soup when the other person is sick without being asked. Vanessa was the only person Elena had told about the contract marriage. She told her 8 months in, after the Vermont trip, after she realized she was in love with Grant and needed someone to tell her she was not crazy. Vanessa had said, "You are not crazy, but you are in trouble." She was right. When Elena called Vanessa from the on-call room at 2 in the morning, Vanessa did not ask what happened. She did not say she was sorry. She said, "I am coming to get you. Stay there." She arrived 40 minutes later with a duffel bag full of her own clothes, a box of crackers, because she remembered that Elena had mentioned nausea, and a legal pad that was already half full of notes. In the car on the way to Vanessa's apartment, Vanessa asked Elena to tell her everything, every detail of the contract, every conversation with Grant, every document she had seen. Elena talked for 90 minutes straight. Vanessa did not interrupt once. When Elena was finished, Vanessa was quiet for a long time. Then she pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and looked at Elena. "Let me get this straight," she said. "He married you under a contract that you signed without independent legal counsel while you were under financial duress." He consummated the marriage repeatedly. He developed what any reasonable court would interpret as a genuine marital relationship. He got you pregnant, and then he threw you out like yesterday's takeout, changed the locks, canceled your credit cards, and sent you a letter threatening legal action if you do not sign an NDA and disappear. Elena nodded. Vanessa started the car again and pulled back onto the road. "Oh, honey," she said. "He did not just break a contract. He handed us a loaded gun and pointed it at his own face." Vanessa took Elena's case pro bono. She cleared out her second bedroom, which had been serving as a home office and a storage space for an alarming number of kickboxing gloves, and told Elena she could stay as long as she needed. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa built a case. She started with the contract itself. It was 17 pages long, drafted by Grant's legal team, and it was designed to be airtight. But Vanessa found cracks. First, Elena was never advised to seek independent legal counsel before signing. This was not just an oversight. Under New York's unconscionability standards, a contract this one-sided, drafted entirely by one party's attorneys, and signed by someone with no legal representation, could be challenged. Second, Elena signed the contract under financial duress. She was $94,000 in debt, had just lost her car, and had her hours cut, and was approached by Grant's representatives at the lowest point in her financial life. Vanessa argued that the circumstances of the signing met the legal threshold for duress. Third, and most critically, the marriage was consummated, repeatedly, over many months. Under New York law, a consummated marriage is a real marriage, regardless of the circumstances under which it was entered. The contract could define the arrangement however it wanted, but the law defined it differently. Elena was Grant Davenport's legal wife, with all the protections that status carried. Fourth, Elena was pregnant. Under New York domestic relations law, a pregnancy during marriage changed everything: custody, child support, spousal support, asset division. The legal landscape shifted dramatically when a child was involved. Vanessa also began investigating Brittany Cole. It did not take long. Brittany was not a subtle person. Her Instagram account, which had 340,000 followers, was a catalog of luxury vacations, designer clothing hauls, and selfies with captions like "Living my best life" and "You cannot sit with us." She had a clothing line called B. Cole Luxe that sold overpriced loungewear with inspirational quotes embroidered on the pockets. She had met Grant at a rooftop party in the Hamptons 8 months earlier. The math was simple and devastating. Grant was sleeping with Brittany while sleeping with Elena. He was telling Elena, "I did not plan on you," while planning his future with someone else. Brittany knew about the contract. She knew about Elena. She thought it was funny. A screenshot leaked from a private group chat showed a message from Brittany to 3 friends. It read, "She was basically a temp employee, LOL, like a really long-term house sitter who got too comfortable," followed by 3 laughing face emojis. Elena saw the screenshot. She sat on Vanessa's couch and stared at it for a long time. She did not cry. She had used up her tears for the week. Instead, she felt something she had not felt before. Not sadness, not humiliation, something harder, something with edges. She said, "I want to fight." Vanessa smiled. "Good. Because we are going to win." 2 weeks later, Vanessa filed an emergency motion in New York Supreme Court, Domestic Relations Division. The motion requested temporary spousal support, continuation of health insurance, a restraining order preventing Grant from disposing of marital assets, and an order preserving Elena's right to the marital residence pending final resolution. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Elena wore the only professional outfit she still owned, a navy blue blazer she had bought at a consignment shop in Brooklyn, and a pair of black pants that were starting to feel tight around the waist. Vanessa wore her courtroom armor, a charcoal suit, and red heels that clicked on the marble floor like a countdown. Grant did not appear. He sent his attorney, a corporate lawyer named Philip Strand, who clearly viewed family court as beneath him. Philip argued that the marriage was a contractual arrangement, that Elena had been compensated, and that her claims were, quote, "an opportunistic attempt to extract additional financial benefit from a completed business transaction," end quote. Vanessa destroyed him. She presented the contract, highlighting the absence of independent counsel. She presented Elena's financial records at the time of signing, demonstrating duress. She presented text messages between Elena and Grant that showed genuine romantic interactions spanning months, including the "I did not plan on you" text. She presented medical records confirming the pregnancy. The judge, a woman named Honorable Ruth Delgado, who had been on the bench for 22 years and had seen every version of rich men behaving badly, reviewed the evidence and ruled from the bench. Temporary spousal support of $12,000 per month, continuation of health insurance through Grant's plan, a restraining order preventing the disposal or transfer of marital assets, and an order preserving Elena's right to access the marital residence pending final resolution of the case. Elena cried in the courthouse hallway. Not the desperate, choking tears of the on-call room. Clean tears, relief tears, the kind of tears that come when you have been holding your breath for so long that the first full inhale feels like a miracle. Vanessa bought her a sandwich from the deli across the street and sat with her on a bench outside the courthouse. "This is just round one," Vanessa said, "but it is a damn good round." Elena found a small apartment in Brooklyn Heights, a 1-bedroom with a window that faced a brick wall, but it was hers. She paid the deposit with the first spousal support check. She bought groceries. She bought a tiny pair of yellow baby socks from a shop on Atlantic Avenue and hung them on the refrigerator with a magnet. She started sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The worst had not even started. Grant Davenport did not lose gracefully. He had never lost anything in his life. Not a tennis match at the Greenwich Country Club, not a deal at Davenport Capital, not a woman, and he was not going to let a nurse practitioner from Kentucky be the first exception. He called Martin Wolf. Martin Wolf was 61 years old, a senior partner at Wolf, Garrett, and Burke, and the most feared divorce attorney on the Eastern Seaboard. He had represented hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, a former governor, and 2 members of a European royal family. His specialty was making wives disappear from settlements. Not literally, although his nickname, the Eraser, suggested otherwise. He simply had a talent for turning women who deserved half into women who got nothing. His retainer was $500,000. Grant paid it without blinking. What happened next came in 3 waves, and each wave hit harder than the one before. The first catastrophe arrived on a Monday morning, exactly 9 days after Elena's court victory. Elena walked into Mount Sinai, Brooklyn, for her regular shift and was met at the nurse's station by 2 people she had never seen before. One was a woman from Human Resources. The other was the chief nursing officer, a tall man named Dr. Stephen Pratt, who had barely spoken to Elena in 2 years. They escorted her to a conference room. On the table was a folder. Inside the folder was a formal notice of administrative suspension, pending investigation of, quote, medication, documentation, irregularities, end quote. The notice cited 3 specific incidents from 6 months earlier in which Elena had allegedly documented medication doses incorrectly. Elena knew immediately that the charges were fabricated. She kept meticulous records. Every nurse practitioner did, because in healthcare, documentation was not just paperwork. It was protection. One mistake in a chart could end a career, and Elena had seen it happen. But someone had altered the records. Someone had gone into the electronic medical record system and introduced discrepancies that made it look like Elena had documented one dosage while administering another. It was subtle enough to trigger an investigation, but damning enough to require suspension. The someone was Thomas Whitfield. He was the assistant administrator of hospital operations, a bureaucratic title that gave him access to personnel files, scheduling systems, and critically, the ability to flag documentation for review. Thomas Whitfield played golf every other Saturday with Grant's uncle, Douglas Davenport, at the Winged Foot Golf Club in Mamaroneck. Elena's badge was deactivated. Security walked her through the main entrance, past the emergency department, past the break room, where 3 of her colleagues stood holding coffee cups and staring, past the automatic doors and into the parking lot where she no longer had a car. Her income was gone. Her professional identity, the thing she had built from nothing, the thing that was hers and hers alone, was suspended. And her health insurance through the hospital, the insurance that covered her prenatal care, was terminated. She was 20 weeks pregnant and uninsured. The second catastrophe came 4 days later. Martin Wolf filed a counter motion in Elena's case. The motion was 63 pages long, which in legal terms was less a filing and more a declaration of war. The centerpiece was a surveillance video. The video showed Elena at a bar in the East Village 4 months earlier, during what she now understood was the period when Grant was already sleeping with Brittany. Elena had gone out with Vanessa's brother, Marcus, who was visiting from Philadelphia. Marcus was gay, happily partnered, and one of the kindest people Elena had ever met. They went to a bar because Elena needed to talk to someone, anyone, about the fact that she suspected her husband was losing interest in her, and she did not know why. In the unedited video, Elena was visibly upset. Her eyes were red. She was leaning on the bar with her shoulders hunched. Marcus had his hand on her shoulder, comforting her. At one point, she laughed through tears at something he said, the way people laugh when they are trying not to fall apart. But the video that Martin Wolf presented to the court was not unedited. It had been cut. The tears were removed. The hunched shoulders were removed. What remained was a woman at a bar with a handsome man who was touching her shoulder while she laughed. It looked like a date. It looked like flirtation. It looked like infidelity. Wolf argued that Elena's, quote, extramarital conduct, end quote, called into question her credibility, her fitness as a potential custodial parent, and the paternity of the unborn child. He demanded a prenatal paternity test. The judge, who was not Judge Delgado this time, but a temporary replacement named Judge Alan Mercer, reviewed the video without hearing context or rebuttal. He reversed the temporary spousal support order pending, as he put it, quote, review of new evidence suggesting material misrepresentation, end quote. $12,000 a month, gone. Then Wolf demanded the paternity test. At 20 weeks, the most reliable prenatal paternity test was an amniocentesis, which involved inserting a needle through the abdomen into the uterus to collect amniotic fluid. The procedure carried a small but real risk of complications, including infection and, in rare cases, miscarriage. Elena refused. She refused because she was a nurse and she knew the risks, and she was not going to let Martin Wolf put a needle near her baby to prove something she already knew. Wolf told the court that her refusal was, quote, consistent with a consciousness of guilt regarding paternity, end quote. The third catastrophe came 5 days after the second. Vanessa called Elena at 9 o'clock at night. Her voice was flat, not angry, not sad, flat. The way a person's voice sounds when they are holding something so tightly that if they loosen their grip, even slightly, everything will spill out. Elena, she said, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. Martin Wolf had filed a complaint with the New York State Bar Association. The complaint alleged that Vanessa had solicited Elena as a client, while Elena was, quote, emotionally compromised and unable to exercise independent judgment, end quote. The complaint further alleged a conflict of interest, claiming that Vanessa's personal friendship with Elena compromised her professional objectivity. The allegations were baseless. Vanessa had not solicited Elena. Elena had called her. And a personal friendship did not constitute a conflict of interest under the New York rules of professional conduct. But it did not matter. The Bar Association was required to investigate any formal complaint, and while the investigation was pending, Vanessa could not represent Elena. I am so sorry, Vanessa said. I am going to fight this. I am going to demolish this complaint, and I am going to file a counter-complaint against Wolf for bad faith litigation tactics. But right now, today, I cannot be your lawyer. Elena stood in her Brooklyn Heights apartment and processed what had just happened. In 9 days, she had lost her job, her income, her health insurance, her spousal support, and her attorney. She was 21 weeks pregnant. She had no money. She had no lawyer. She had no one. Grant Davenport had systematically dismantled every support structure she had, not with violence, not with threats, with paperwork, with phone calls, with the quiet, efficient cruelty of a man who had spent his entire life buying whatever outcome he wanted. Elena sat down on the floor of her kitchen. The yellow baby socks were still hanging on the refrigerator. The past due rent notice was taped to the front door. She could feel the baby moving, a flutter, like a tiny fish turning in warm water. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It read, Mr. Davenport is prepared to make a final offer. $200,000 lump sum. Full NDA. Full custody relinquishment. You have 72 hours. This offer will not be extended again. Full custody relinquishment. He wanted her to give up her baby. He was offering her $200,000 for her child. Elena stared at the screen until it went dark. She put her hand on her stomach. The baby kicked. Not a flutter this time, a real kick. Strong, definitive, as if the baby was saying, I am here. Do not forget that I am here. Elena picked up the phone. She typed 4 words. I will see you in court. Then she put the phone down, pressed her back against the kitchen cabinet, and cried. She cried for 3 hours. She cried until she had nothing left. And when she was finished, she washed her face, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out how a woman with no money, no lawyer, and no family was going to fight a billionaire. She did not have an answer. But 3 miles away, in a townhouse on the Upper East Side, a 68-year-old man was sitting in a leather armchair, reading every single court filing that his family attorney had placed on his desk. His reading glasses were on, his jaw was tight, his hands were steady, but his eyes were not. He was furious, not at Elena, at his son. Richard Davenport Sr. had built Davenport Capital from nothing, not from old money, despite what people assumed, not from family connections or inherited wealth or a trust fund that made the hard parts easy. Richard's father was a plumber in Bridgeport, Connecticut. His mother was a school secretary. They lived in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom and a furnace that broke every January. Richard went to the University of Connecticut on a partial scholarship and worked nights at a warehouse to cover the rest. He graduated with a degree in finance, $160 in his bank account, and the kind of hunger that comes from growing up watching your father come home every night with cracked hands and a sore back and never once complaining. He started Davenport Capital in 1981 with a second mortgage on a house he could barely afford and 3 clients who took a chance on a 25-year-old kid with no pedigree. By 1990, he had 50 clients. By 2000, he had 500. By 2010, Davenport Capital managed assets exceeding $2 billion, and Richard Davenport was on the cover of Forbes. But the thing about Richard that the Forbes article did not mention, the thing that people who only knew him from boardrooms and benefit dinners never understood, was that he did not build the company for himself. He built it for Catherine. Catherine Ann Davenport, born Catherine Ann Murphy in Fairfield, Connecticut. She was a kindergarten teacher when they met, and she was still a kindergarten teacher when Richard made his first million, because she loved teaching more than she loved money, and Richard loved her more than he loved anything else in the world. They were married for 38 years. They had 1 child, Grant, and Catherine wanted more but could not have them, and the sadness of that sat quietly in their marriage, like a room they both knew was there, but chose not to open. Catherine died of pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. She was 61. She spent her last weeks in a private room at Yale New Haven Hospital, and Richard sat beside her bed for 18 hours a day. He read to her. He held her hand. He told her about the garden because she loved the garden, and he promised her he would take care of the roses. On her second to last day, she said something that Richard would carry with him for the rest of his life. Her voice was barely a whisper. He had to lean in so close that he could feel her breath on his ear. She said, "Promise me this family will not end with Grant's selfishness, Richard. Promise me there will be something after us." He promised. Then she died. And Richard fell apart. He did not fall apart the way some people do, with drinking or reckless behavior or public scenes. He fell apart quietly. He stopped going to the office. He stopped attending board meetings. He stopped caring about quarterly earnings and market share and the competitive landscape. He signed the operational transfer documents that gave Grant day-to-day control of the company, and he retreated to his townhouse on the Upper East Side, where he tended to Catherine's roses in the back garden and read books and tried to figure out how to be alive without the only person who had made being alive feel worthwhile. He let Grant run things. He should not have. He knew about the contract marriage. George Brennan, the Davenport family attorney for 30 years, had told him. George was old school, discreet, loyal, and his loyalty was to Richard, not to Grant, because Richard was the one who had hired him in 1987 and had never once asked him to do anything dishonest. George told Richard about the contract, and Richard disapproved, and Richard did nothing. That was his first mistake. He told himself it was Grant's life. He told himself he did not have the energy to fight. He told himself Catherine would have handled it, and Catherine was not here. He did not know about Elena. He did not know her name, her face, her story. He did not know that she was a nurse practitioner from Kentucky who had grown up in foster care. He did not know that she had fallen in love with his son. He did not know any of this until 3 weeks ago, when George Brennan sat in Richard's study and placed a stack of court documents on the desk. Richard read everything: the contract, the pregnancy, Grant's demand that Elena terminate the pregnancy, the eviction from the penthouse, the fabricated hospital charges, the edited surveillance video, the bar complaint against Vanessa, the 72-hour ultimatum. He read the text message that Grant's attorney had sent to Elena. $200,000, full NDA, full custody relinquishment. Richard set down the papers. He took off his reading glasses. He looked at George. He is trying to buy his own child, Richard said. George said, yes, and the hospital charges, the video, the complaint against her attorney. He is not just trying to end this marriage. He is trying to destroy this woman. Yes. How long has this been going on? Months. And Richard, there is something else. This is not the first time. Grant did this before, 5 years ago. A woman named Jessica Warren. Same arrangement, same contract, same disposal. She signed the NDA and disappeared. Richard sat in his armchair for a long time after George left. He looked at the photograph of Catherine on the mantelpiece. It was from their 30th anniversary at a restaurant in Florence. She was laughing at something he had said, and the candlelight was in her hair, and she looked so alive that it hurt to look at the photograph and know that she was not. He thought about what she had said in the hospital. Promise me this family will not end with Grant's selfishness. He had broken that promise. He had let Grant become exactly the kind of man that Catherine had feared. Selfish, cruel. The mirror image of Grant's grandfather, the old man who wrote the morality clause in the first place. Because he was a tyrant who believed that control and character were the same thing. Richard picked up the phone. He called George Brennan. Find out where Elena Marsh is, he said. I am going to see her myself. 2 days later, Richard Davenport Sr. walked into a free prenatal clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn. He was wearing a cashmere coat that cost $4,000. He was surrounded by women in secondhand jackets and worn sneakers, women who came to this clinic because they had nowhere else to go. He sat in a plastic chair next to Elena Marsh. She was reading a parenting magazine that was 2 years old. She did not recognize him. Mrs. Marsh, he said, my name is Richard Davenport. I am Grant's father. Elena's entire body went rigid. She looked at him the way a person looks at a car that is about to hit them. She pulled her arms around her stomach as if she could shield the baby with her body. Before you say anything, Richard said, I want you to know 3 things. I know what my son has done. I know what he is doing right now. And I am here because my late wife would never have forgiven me if I sat in my house and let this happen?" Elena stared at him. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were hard. She had spent months being betrayed by people she trusted. And here was another Davenport, sitting next to her, in a clinic where the ceiling tiles had water stains and the magazines were from 2 years ago. "Why should I believe you?" she said. Richard did not have a ready answer for that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out a photograph. It was a small print, wallet-sized, with creased edges. The photograph showed a woman with gray hair and kind eyes standing in a garden full of roses. She was smiling directly at the camera. "This is Catherine," Richard said. "My wife. She died 5 years ago. The last thing she asked me to do was make sure this family did not end with Grant's selfishness. I failed her. I have been failing her every day since, but I am done failing." He placed the photograph on the armrest of Elena's chair. "That baby you are carrying is my grandchild," he said. "Catherine's grandchild. And I am not going to let my son throw away the only thing in this family that still matters." Elena looked at the photograph. She looked at Richard. His eyes were red. His hands were trembling. She had spent her life reading people because her survival had depended on it. And everything in her training, everything in her instincts, told her that this man was not performing. He was breaking. She said, "What exactly are you proposing?" Richard said, "I am proposing that we make my son deeply regret every single thing he has done to you, and I am proposing that we do it properly." Richard Davenport did not do anything halfway. He had not built a $2.3 billion company by being cautious, and he was not going to dismantle his son's campaign of destruction by being cautious either. The first thing he did was hire Patricia Calloway. Patricia Calloway was 54 years old, a senior partner at Calloway and Price in Washington, D.C. And she was the only family law attorney in the eastern United States who had beaten Martin Wolf in court. She had beaten him twice. The first time, Wolf lost a case involving a senator's wife who was supposed to walk away with nothing and instead walked away with $37 million and the house in Georgetown. The second time, Wolf lost so badly that his client fired him in the parking lot of the courthouse. Patricia was not cheap. Her retainer was $300,000. Richard paid it and told her to hire whatever team she needed. Patricia arrived in New York with 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a forensic accountant named Howard Klein, who had a reputation for finding money the way bloodhounds find missing persons. Within 72 hours, they had set up a war room in a suite at the Mandarin Oriental and had begun systematically dismantling every weapon Martin Wolf had deployed. The surveillance video was the first target. Patricia's investigators traced the video back to its source, a private investigator named Dale Rourke, who had been hired by Grant 4 months before the contract was scheduled to end. This was critical. Grant had hired the PI not in response to any behavior by Elena, but as a preemptive measure. He had planned to use surveillance footage against her no matter what she did. The PI's billing records, obtained through subpoena, showed that he had been following Elena for 16 weeks and had compiled over 200 hours of footage. The 9-second clip that Wolf presented to the court was the only segment that could be made to look incriminating, and even that required editing. Patricia's team obtained the full unedited footage. It showed exactly what Elena had described. A woman crying at a bar while a man comforted her. The man, Marcus Cole, Vanessa's brother, was prepared to testify that he was in a committed relationship with his partner, David, and that he and Elena had been discussing her marital problems. The hospital charges were the second target. Howard Klein, the forensic accountant, was not technically an investigator, but he had a particular talent for following paper trails. He discovered that Thomas Whitfield, the hospital administrator who had filed the complaint against Elena, had received a wire transfer of $75,000 from a shell company called Greenfield Consulting LLC exactly 8 days before filing the complaint. Greenfield Consulting LLC was registered in Delaware with no physical address, no employees, and no apparent business purpose. Its sole managing member was listed as Douglas Davenport, Grant's uncle. Klein also found emails, not between Grant and Whitfield directly, because Grant was too careful for that, but between Douglas Davenport and Whitfield, in which Douglas referred to, quote, the personnel matter we discussed at the club, end quote, and Whitfield responded with, quote, I will handle the documentation review this week, end quote. It was not a smoking gun. It was a smoking arsenal. Patricia contacted the hospital board chairman directly. Not as a threat. She presented the wire transfer records, the emails, and the timeline showing that the complaint was filed 8 days after the payment. She informed the board that Richard Davenport Sr., who had donated a cumulative $15 million to Mount Sinai over the past decade, would be deeply concerned if an independent investigation was not initiated within 30 days. Thomas Whitfield was suspended within a week. Elena's nursing record was flagged for expedited independent review. The third front was financial, and this was where Richard played his strongest card. Grant believed he controlled the Davenport empire. He ran the company. He made the investment decisions. He signed the checks. He sat in the corner office on the 42nd floor of the Davenport Capitol Building in Midtown Manhattan and believed he was king. But Grant did not own the castle. When Richard transferred operational control 5 years ago, he retained ownership of the family's real property through a holding company called Davenport Heritage, LLC. The penthouse at 740 Park Avenue, the estate in Greenwich, the beach house in East Hampton, the commercial building in Stamford, all of it was held in Richard's name through the LLC. Grant had control of the investment firm, the liquid assets, the portfolio. But the physical properties, the houses, the land, the buildings, those belonged to Richard. They always had. Grant either did not know this or had never bothered to check, because Grant had never cared about details that did not directly involve money in his bank account. Richard had Patricia file a formal notice with the court establishing his ownership of the properties. This meant that Grant could not sell, mortgage, or transfer any of the real estate. And it meant something else, something that Richard was saving for the right moment. It meant that the penthouse Grant had locked Elena out of was not Grant's to lock her out of. The fourth element was Jessica Warren. Jessica was the woman Grant had married under a similar contract 5 years earlier, right around the time Catherine was dying. The timing was not coincidental. Grant needed the trust money to fund an expansion of Davenport Capital, and his mother was too sick to notice what he was doing. Jessica signed the NDA. She took $300,000 and disappeared to a small town in Vermont, where she worked as a yoga instructor and tried not to think about the 18 months she had spent pretending to be someone's wife. Patricia found her. It took 2 phone calls. Jessica was terrified at first. The NDA had a penalty clause of $5 million for breach. But Patricia explained that the NDA was signed under the same conditions of duress and lack of independent counsel as Elena's contract, and was likely unenforceable. She also explained that Jessica's testimony would establish a pattern of behavior, which was one of the most powerful evidentiary tools in family court. Jessica agreed to testify. She provided a detailed written statement describing her experience, text messages from her time with Grant, and the names of 3 people who could corroborate her account. She did not have recordings. She did not need them. Because Brittany Cole was about to provide something better than recordings. It happened on a Friday night. Brittany and Grant had been arguing more frequently as the legal pressure mounted. Grant was stressed. Brittany was angry because Grant had canceled their trip to St. Bart's and because, in her words, quote, "Your ex-servant is ruining our lives," end quote. The argument that night was particularly vicious. Grant told Brittany she was being selfish. Brittany told Grant he was being cheap. Grant told Brittany that if she could not handle the pressure, she could leave. Brittany told Grant that she had given up everything for him, and he had better remember who stood by him. It escalated until Brittany stormed into the bathroom, slammed the door, and pulled out her phone. She opened Instagram. She intended to vent on her private close friend's story, the way she always did when she was angry, posting to a curated group of 42 people who she trusted to validate her grievances. But her hands were shaking, and she was on her third glass of wine, and she tapped the wrong button. She went live on her public account, 340,000 followers. For 9 minutes, Brittany Cole sat on the bathroom floor of Grant Davenport's apartment and said every terrible thing she had ever thought about Elena Marsh. She called Elena a servant. She called her a gold digger. She called her a charity case who got lucky. She said Elena had gotten herself knocked up on purpose to trap Grant. She said Elena was nothing, nobody, a foster kid from Kentucky who should have stayed in Kentucky. But the moment that detonated, the moment that would be clipped and shared and viewed over 14 million times in the next 72 hours, came at the 7-minute mark. Grant walked into the bathroom. He did not see the phone propped against the mirror. He did not know he was live on Instagram in front of what was now, due to the rapidly spreading notification, over 40,000 real-time viewers. Brittany said, "She thinks she can take everything from you because of that baby." Grant said, "I do not care about the kid. I never wanted it. The kid is a bargaining chip, Brittany. Once I get custody on paper, I will dump it with a nanny, and she will never see it again. That is how you win. You take what they love." 40,000 people heard him say that in real time. Within an hour, the clip was on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and every parenting forum in America. Within 24 hours, Servant Girl was trending nationally. Within 48 hours, Brittany's follower count had dropped from 340,000 to 89,000. Her clothing brand partner issued a statement distancing themselves from her. 3 media outlets had reached out to Elena for comment. Elena did not comment. She sat in her Brooklyn apartment watching the clip on her phone with her hand on her stomach and felt something she had not expected to feel. Nothing. She felt nothing, because she already knew. She had known since the night he told her to handle this. She had known since the locks changed and the boxes appeared in the lobby. She had known since Eddie would not look at her. Grant Davenport did not love their baby. He never would. And the fact that the rest of the world now knew, it did not change what Elena had known for months. But it changed everything else. Richard Davenport watched the clip alone in his study. He watched it 3 times. The third time, he paused on the frame where Grant said, "I do not care about the kid." He picked up the phone and called Patricia Calloway. "Move up the timeline," he said. "I want this finished at the gala." The weeks that followed the live stream felt, to Elena, like emerging from underwater. Patricia Calloway's team moved with devastating efficiency. The full, unedited surveillance video was submitted to the court with Marcus Cole's sworn affidavit, confirming his identity, his relationship status, and the context of the evening. The forensic evidence linking Thomas Whitfield to the Davenport family through the $75,000 wire transfer was presented to both the court and the hospital board. Vanessa Cole was fully exonerated of the bar complaint after Patricia filed a counter motion demonstrating that Wolf's complaint was a strategic filing made in bad faith. Vanessa was back. She called Lana the night the exoneration came through. "I am back, baby," she said, "and I am angry, which means somebody is about to have a very bad day." The case went before Judge Delgado again, the original judge, after Elena's team filed a motion to have Judge Mercer's interim ruling reviewed. Patricia presented the full scope of evidence to Judge Delgado in a hearing that lasted 4 hours. The full, unedited surveillance video with Marcus Cole's testimony, the wire transfer connecting Thomas Whitfield to the Davenport family, the emails between Douglas Davenport and Whitfield coordinating the fabricated complaint, the private investigators' billing records showing 16 weeks of surveillance on Elena, initiated before she had done anything to warrant it. Jessica Warren's written testimony describing an identical pattern of contract marriage, exploitation, and disposal. The Brittany Cole live stream entered into evidence as a statement against interest by a party with direct knowledge of Grant's intentions, and Grant's own words broadcast to 40,000 viewers. "I do not care about the kid. The kid is a bargaining chip." Judge Delgado ruled from the bench. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were not. She reinstated temporary spousal support at $12,000 per month, backdated to the date of the original reversal. She ordered Grant's health insurance to cover Elena's prenatal care retroactively. She issued an emergency asset freeze on all of Grant's liquid accounts, pending a full forensic audit. She referred the Whitfield matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation, and she issued a preliminary custody finding that stated, in language so precise it felt like a blade, quote, "The court finds no credible basis for the respondent's claims regarding paternity or maternal fitness, and notes with concern the respondent's own statements regarding his intentions for the minor child." End quote. Elena sat in the courtroom and did not cry. She was beyond crying. She felt something she had almost forgotten: safety. The tentative, fragile sensation of standing on ground that might actually hold. Vanessa drove her home. In the car, Elena said, "Do you think it is over?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think the hard part is over, but we still have to finish it. And Patricia has a plan for that." Elena went home to her Brooklyn apartment. She heated up soup. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the yellow baby socks on the refrigerator. The baby was kicking regularly now. Strong kicks, demanding kicks. Elena was 7 months pregnant, and the baby was big and active and completely unaware of the war that had been fought over her existence. Elena decided, in that quiet moment, that the baby was a girl. She had not done the genetic testing. She did not know for certain, but she felt it. And she decided to trust the feeling, because trusting her feelings was something she was learning to do again after months of having every feeling she had questioned, manipulated, and used against her. She also decided on a name, Catherine, after the grandmother her daughter would never meet but would always know about, because Elena would make sure of it. For the first time in months, Elena slept peacefully. She dreamed about a garden full of roses and an old man pushing a stroller through the morning light. She woke up feeling something dangerous: hope. And here's the thing about hope that Elena should have remembered. Hope is not the same as safety. Hope is the breath you take before the next wave hits. And the next wave was already coming. Richard's plan was simple. The Davenport Annual Charity Gala was 3 weeks away. It was the social event of the Connecticut season. 300 guests, black tie, press coverage. Every major donor, business associate, and social connection the Davenport family had cultivated over 4 decades would be in one room, Grant was planning to attend with Brittany. Despite the live stream disaster, despite the trending hashtags, despite the public humiliation, Grant Davenport was going to walk into that gala with the woman who had called his pregnant wife a servant on camera, and he was going to act like nothing had happened. Because that was what Davenports did. They showed up. They smiled. They dared anyone to question them. Richard was going to let him. He was going to let Grant walk into that gala with Brittany on his arm, feeling secure, feeling untouchable, believing that money and name and 300 years of family reputation would protect him from the consequences of his actions. And then Richard was going to burn it all down. He personally added 2 names to the guest list, Elena Marsh and Vanessa Cole. He did not tell Grant. He did not tell anyone except Patricia Calloway and George Brennan. When Richard called Elena to tell her the plan, she was quiet for a long time. "I do not know if I can walk into that room," she said. Richard said, "You can. I will make sure of that." Elena said, "What if she is there? What if Brittany is there and she says something and I cannot?" Elena could not finish the sentence. Richard said, "Elena, listen to me. In 3 weeks, you are going to walk into that gala, and every person in that room is going to know exactly who you are. Not because of Grant. Not because of Brittany. Because of you. Catherine would have wanted you there, and I am asking you to trust me." There was a long pause. Then Elena said, "Okay, I trust you." She should not have felt safe. She should have known that Grant still had one move left. But she was tired, and she was hopeful, and for 3 weeks she let herself believe that the worst was finally behind her. She bought a dress. Navy blue, simple, not designer. She found it at a consignment shop in Park Slope, and it fit perfectly over her 7-month belly. She bought shoes that were comfortable enough to stand in for hours because she was a nurse, and she knew better than to wear heels at 7 months pregnant, no matter what the occasion. Vanessa came over the night before the gala. She brought Thai food and a bottle of sparkling cider and a tube of red lipstick. "You are going to walk into that room tomorrow," Vanessa said, "and you are going to look every single one of those people in the eye. And when they stare at you, and they will stare at you, you are going to smile, because you survived. And surviving is the most beautiful thing a woman can wear," Elena said. "That was very poetic, V," Vanessa said. "I have been practicing it in the mirror all week." They laughed. And for one night, it almost felt normal. The Davenport estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, sat on 11 acres of manicured grounds overlooking Long Island Sound. The main house was built in 1923 by Grant's great-grandfather, a timber baron with more money than taste, and it had been renovated 3 times since then. The most recent renovation was Catherine's. She had softened the hard edges, replaced the dark paneling with light, planted the rose garden that Richard now tended every morning. The house was beautiful in the way that old money often was. Not showy, just quietly, effortlessly, undeniably expensive. On the evening of the gala, the estate was lit from every angle. White lights in the trees along the drive, lanterns on the stone paths, the ballroom, a converted conservatory with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on the Sound, was filled with round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus, and 300 chairs occupied by 300 of the most influential people in the tri-state area. Grant arrived at 7:15 with Brittany on his arm. He wore a black tuxedo. She wore a red dress. They looked like a magazine cover. They looked like they belonged. Grant shook hands. He smiled. He worked the room the way his father had taught him, moving from table to table, remembering names, asking about children and grandchildren and vacation homes. He was performing, and he was good at it. He had been performing his entire life. Brittany was less controlled. She was drinking champagne too quickly, and she was laughing too loudly, and she was touching Grant's arm with the possessive frequency of a woman who was not quite sure she had the right to be there. The live stream had damaged her. She had lost followers, sponsors, and the easy confidence that comes from believing the internet likes you. She was trying to rebuild her image tonight, and the trying was visible. At 7:45, a black car pulled up to the valet stand. Vanessa stepped out first. She was wearing a charcoal suit with a red silk blouse. So? And she looked like she was about to cross-examine someone, which, in a way, she was. Elena stepped out second. Navy blue dress, low heels. Her hair was down, which she almost never did, because Vanessa had told her that sometimes the bravest thing a woman could do was take up space. She was 7 months pregnant. Her belly was round and prominent and impossible to ignore. She stood on the gravel drive and looked up at the house. The last time she had been here was for a Davenport family dinner, 7 months ago, when she was still playing the role of Grant's wife. She had sat at the dining table and laughed at Grant's uncle's jokes and helped Catherine's friend, Margaret, clear the dessert plates because Elena could not sit still at a table while other people worked. Now she was walking back in. Not as Grant's wife, not as a servant, as Elena Marsh. Richard met them at the side entrance. He was wearing a dark suit, no tuxedo, because Richard had never liked tuxedos. He looked at Elena and something shifted in his face. A softening, a recognition. "You look just like her," he said quietly. Elena did not ask who he meant. She already knew. Richard escorted them into the ballroom through a side hallway, away from the main entrance, so that Grant would not see Elena arrive. He seated them at a table near the front, close to the small stage where the podium was set up for the evening's speeches. Elena sat down. Her heart was hammering. She could see Grant across the room, standing near the bar, talking to a group of men in suits. He had not seen her yet. Brittany was beside him, champagne glass in hand, red dress catching the light. Vanessa put her hand on Elena's arm and said, "Breathe." Elena breathed. The dinner service began at 8 o'clock. 3 courses, salad, salmon, and a chocolate dessert that Elena could not eat because the baby was pressing against her stomach, and she could barely fit water in there, let alone chocolate mousse. At 8:45, Grant was scheduled to give the opening toast. It was tradition. The CEO of Davenport Capital welcomed the guests, thanked the donors, and said something inspiring about the charity, which this year was a children's literacy foundation that Catherine had supported. Grant stood up from his table. He adjusted his cufflinks. He nodded to Brittany, who gave him a smile that looked rehearsed. He began walking toward the stage. He did not make it to the podium, because Richard was already there. Elena watched as Richard stepped onto the small stage from the side entrance, moving with the quiet authority of a man who had commanded rooms for 40 years. He approached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The feedback whine cut through the ballroom noise, and 300 conversations died simultaneously. Grant stopped walking. He was 10 feet from the stage. His father was at the microphone. This was not the plan. Grant's face cycled through confusion, irritation, and the first flicker of something he rarely felt: fear. "Good evening," Richard said. His voice was steady. His hands were not. But no one could see that from the audience. For those who do not know me, and at my age that is increasingly likely, my name is Richard Davenport. I built this company in 1981 with a second mortgage and a promise to my wife Catherine that I would give our family something worth being proud of. He paused. He looked at the room. 300 faces. Some he had known for decades. Some he did not recognize. All of them watching. Catherine passed away 5 years ago. And in those 5 years, I have done a lot of things I am not proud of, chief among them. I looked away when I should have looked closer. I trusted when I should have verified, and I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I am not staying silent anymore. The room was absolutely still, not the polite stillness of an audience waiting for a speech to end, the electric stillness of people who sense that something is about to happen. Grant took a step toward the stage. "Dad," he said, "this is not—" Richard did not look at him. He continued speaking as if Grant had not made a sound. "A few minutes ago, a woman in this room called my daughter-in-law a servant." Elena felt every cell in her body go cold. She had not heard it yet. She had been at her table, at the front, facing the stage. The confrontation with Brittany had not happened yet. Richard had changed the timeline. He was preempting it. But then Elena realized Richard was not preventing the confrontation. He was narrating one that had already happened. Not tonight, on the live stream, in the public record. The word servant was already attached to Elena's name in the minds of millions of people. Richard was reclaiming it. She said it loudly enough for half this room to hear, and not one person in this room corrected her. Richard looked at the audience, not accusingly, sadly. "So let me correct it now." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a leather folder. It was slim, dark brown, the kind of folder that lawyers use for documents that change lives. He opened it slowly. He held up the first document so the room could see it, even though no one could read it from that distance. The gesture was the point, the formality, the ceremony. "This is a property deed," Richard said. "It transfers full legal ownership of the Davenport residence in Greenwich, Connecticut. This house, the one you are all standing in, to Elena Grace Marsh, my daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchild." The gasp was not one sound. It was 300 sounds at once, a collective intake of breath that swept through the room like wind through tall grass. Richard pulled out a second document, and this transfers ownership of the Davenport penthouse at 740 Park Avenue in Manhattan to the same woman, the woman my son married, the woman my son threw out onto the street while she was carrying his child, the woman who has been called a servant, a charity case, and a contract girl by people who are not fit to stand in the same room with her. Grant moved. He surged toward the stage, his composure finally cracking. "Dad, what are you doing? You cannot just—" "Sit down, Grant." Richard's voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was the voice of a man who had built an empire, buried his wife, and spent 5 years in grief, and who had finally found something worth fighting for. Grant sat down, not because he chose to, because his legs gave out. He dropped into the nearest empty chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Richard continued, "My son entered into a fraudulent marriage contract to satisfy the morality clause in this family's trust. A clause, I will remind you, that was written to ensure the Davenport name would be carried by people of character." He paused on the word character. He hired a woman to play his wife, and when that woman, despite every reason not to, showed him genuine love and became pregnant with his child, he threw her out on the street. He fabricated charges to destroy her career. He manipulated the courts to take her money. He filed false complaints against her attorney. And he told his girlfriend, on a public live stream viewed by 14 million people, that the mother of my grandchild was just a servant. Richard turned his gaze to Brittany. She was standing near the bar, champagne glass still in her hand, frozen. The red dress that had seemed so powerful when she walked in now looked like a target. "Miss Cole, you are not a Davenport. You will never be a Davenport, and you are no longer welcome in this house. Security will escort you out." 2 security guards, hired by Richard specifically for this moment, appeared at Brittany's sides. They did not touch her. They did not need to. Their presence was enough. Brittany's mouth opened. No sound came out. Her champagne glass tilted in her hand, and a thin stream of liquid ran over her fingers and onto the floor. She looked at Grant. Grant did not look at her. He was staring at the tablecloth in front of him. The guards walked Brittany out, through the ballroom, past the round tables with the white linen and the white roses, past the 300 people who turned in their chairs to watch, through the main entrance, past the valet stand where 2 newspaper photographers captured the exact moment she stepped through the door in her red dress with mascara running down her face. The photographs would be made on page 6 by morning. Richard turned back to the room. Elena Marsh came into this family with nothing and gave it the only thing that matters. A future. She is carrying my grandchild. She is the bravest person I have ever met. And as of tonight, she owns the roof over your heads. He stepped away from the podium. He walked down the 3 steps from the stage. He crossed the ballroom floor, and the only sound was his shoes on the hardwood and the absolute thundering silence of 300 people holding their breath. He stopped in front of Elena. She was standing. She did not remember standing up. Her hands were shaking. Her face was wet. This baby was kicking with what felt like fury, as if she could feel the electricity in the room and was responding to it. Richard held out the leather folder. "This belongs to you," he said. "It always should have." Elena took the folder. She held it against her chest. She could not speak. She could not breathe. She stood there, 7 months pregnant, in a navy blue dress from a consignment shop in Park Slope, holding the deed to a house that was worth more than she had ever dreamed of earning in a lifetime, and she looked at the man who was giving it to her. Richard put his hand on her shoulder, gently, the way a father would. "Catherine would have loved you," he said. The room erupted. The applause started at the front tables and rolled backward through the ballroom like a wave breaking on a shore. People stood, one by one, and then all at once. 300 people on their feet, clapping, some of them crying, some of them shaking their heads, some of them looking at the empty chair where Grant had been sitting because somewhere, during Richard's speech, Grant Davenport had stood up and walked out through a side door into the darkness of the Connecticut night. Nobody followed him. Vanessa was beside Elena, arm around her shoulders, tears streaming down her face, saying something that Elena could not hear over the applause, something about being proud, something about Catherine, something about burning it all down. Elena held the leather folder against her chest and closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her like warm water. She had spent her entire life being invisible, in foster homes, in hospital hallways, in lobbies where doormen would not look at her. She had spent 34 years taking care of other people and asking nothing and needing nothing and pretending that needing nothing was the same as being strong. It was not. Being strong was standing in a room full of 300 people who had watched you be called a servant and choosing to stay. Being strong was putting your hand on your belly and saying, without words, "I am here, I belong here, and I am never leaving." Someone in the back of the room started a chant. "Elena, Elena, Elena." She opened her eyes. She looked at Richard. He was crying. The 68-year-old man who had built an empire and buried his wife and failed his son and spent 5 years hiding from the world was standing in front of her, weeping openly, and he did not look weak. He looked like a man who had finally done the one thing that mattered. "Thank you," Elena whispered. Richard shook his head. "Do not thank me. You did this. All of it. I just opened the door. You are the one who walked through it. The weeks after the gala moved quickly. Judge Delgado scheduled the final divorce hearing for 3 weeks after the event. By then, the public attention had amplified the legal proceedings into something that could not be buried or delayed. The court filings were a matter of public record. The live stream was everywhere. And the photographs of Britney being escorted out of the gala in her red dress had been published in every New York tabloid and several national outlets. Martin Wolf withdrew from the case. He did not file a formal motion. He simply sent a letter to the court stating that, quote, due to irreconcilable strategic differences with his client, end quote, he was terminating his representation of Grant Davenport, effective immediately. The real reason, which became clear in the weeks that followed, was that Wolf had realized the case was unwinnable, and that continuing to represent Grant would damage his own reputation. Martin Wolf had built a career on making wives disappear from settlements. He did not want to be known as the man who failed to erase Elena Marsh. Grant hired a new attorney, a younger lawyer named Stephen Park, who specialized in damage control rather than aggressive litigation. Stephen's strategy was simple and predictable: minimize, settle, move on. But Patricia Calloway was not interested in a quiet settlement. The final hearing lasted 2 days. On the first day, Patricia presented the complete case: the contract, signed under duress without independent counsel, the consummation of the marriage over a period of months, the pregnancy, Grant's demand that Elena terminate the pregnancy, the systematic campaign to destroy Elena's career, legal representation, and financial stability, the wire transfer to Thomas Whitfield, the edited surveillance video. The private investigators' 16-week surveillance operation initiated before Elena had done anything to warrant it. Jessica Warren's testimony establishing a pattern of behavior, and the live stream in which Grant stated on camera that he did not care about his child and intended to use custody as a weapon. On the second day, Elena testified. She wore the same navy blue blazer she had worn to her first hearing months earlier. It no longer fit over her belly. She wore a white blouse, and the blazer draped over the back of her chair. Patricia asked her simple questions. What was the arrangement? How did it change? When did you realize you were in love with him? When did you realize he was not in love with you? What did he say when you told him about the baby? What happened in the 72 hours after that conversation? Elena answered every question with the precision of someone who had spent her career documenting medical histories. She did not exaggerate. She did not dramatize. She spoke in clear, measured sentences, and she looked at the judge, not at Grant, because Grant was not the audience that mattered. The only time her voice wavered was when Patricia asked about the text message. The 72-hour ultimatum. $200,000 for full custody relinquishment. Elena paused. She put her hand on her stomach. She said, "He offered me $200,000 for my daughter. He did not want her. He has never wanted her. He wanted to use her to hurt me. And when I said no, he tried to take everything else." Judge Delgado asked if Elena had anything else to say. Elena thought for a moment. Then she said, "I signed a contract because I was desperate. That was my mistake. But I became his wife. I fell in love with him. I carried his child. And when he threw me away, I did not break. I am not asking for revenge. I am not asking for punishment. I am asking for what is fair for me and for my daughter, because she did not sign a contract. She did not choose any of this, and she deserves a mother who can take care of her without being afraid." Judge Delgado's ruling was comprehensive. The marriage contract was declared unconscionable and unenforceable, having been signed under financial duress without independent legal counsel. The marriage itself was declared valid, consummated, and legally binding Under New York domestic relations law, Elena was awarded sole legal and physical custody of the child. Grant was granted supervised visitation at a neutral facility contingent on completion of a parenting evaluation. Spousal support was set at $14,000 per month for a period of 5 years. The division of marital assets awarded Elena approximately $14 million, representing her equitable share of the assets accumulated during the marriage. This was in addition to the properties transferred by Richard, which were not marital assets and therefore not subject to division. The court referred the matter of the fabricated hospital charges to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. It also referred the offshore asset concealment discovered during the forensic audit to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The NDA that Grant had demanded Elena sign was declared void and unenforceable. Judge Delgado concluded her ruling with a statement that was quoted in 3 newspapers the following day. The court notes that the respondent's conduct in this matter reflects a systematic and deliberate campaign to deprive the petitioner of her livelihood, her legal representation, her financial security, and her parental rights. The court further notes that this campaign was funded by extraordinary wealth and executed through legal manipulation, fabricated evidence, and the abuse of institutional relationships. This court will not allow wealth to be weaponized against the vulnerable. This court will not allow a child to be used as a bargaining chip, and this court will not allow any person to be erased. Elena walked out of the courthouse with Vanessa on one side and Patricia on the other. She stood on the steps and looked at the sky. It was October. The air was cool. The trees along Center Street were turning gold. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. It said, "Catherine would be proud." Elena typed back, "She would be proud of you too." 6 weeks later, Elena went into labor. Vanessa drove her to the hospital, the same hospital where Elena had worked, where she had started IV zits and sutured lacerations and held the hands of strangers. She was readmitted not as a nurse, but as a patient, and the nurses who cared for her were some of the same colleagues who had watched security walk her out months earlier. One of them, Deborah, the nurse who had asked if she was okay in the parking lot, was on shift that night. She held Elena's hand during the hardest contractions and said, "We have got you, Elena. We have always had you." Lily Catherine Marsh was born at 3:17 in the morning, weighing 7 pounds and 4 ounces. She had dark hair and her mother's jaw and her grandmother's eyes, though Elena did not know that last part until Richard came to the hospital the next day and stood at the nursery window and said, in a voice so quiet Elena almost did not hear it, "She has Catherine's eyes." He held Lily for the first time in the hospital room. He sat in the vinyl chair beside Elena's bed and held his granddaughter against his chest and did not speak for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full. "Hello, little one," he said. "I am your grandfather, and I am going to tell you everything about your grandmother. Every single story, starting with the one about the roses." 18 months later, Greenwich, Connecticut, early morning, June. The sun was coming through the tall windows of the breakfast room in the Davenport estate, which Elena still sometimes had to remind herself was her house. Her name was on the deed. Her name was on the mailbox. Her daughter's handprint, made in plaster at a Mommy and Me class in Stamford, hung on the wall beside the kitchen door. Lily Catherine Marsh was 14 months old, and she was, according to her grandfather, the most brilliant child in the history of human civilization. This assessment was based primarily on the fact that Lily could say 4 words, Mama, Papa, which she used for Richard, Ball, and No, the last of which she used with great enthusiasm and frequency. Elena sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watched through the window as Richard pushed Lily in the stroller through the garden. He did this every morning, rain or shine, snow or summer. He had converted Catherine's rose garden into a path wide enough for the stroller, and he had added a sandbox and a small wooden swing that he had commissioned from a carpenter in town. Next to the swing was a bench with a brass plaque that read, "For Catherine." She would have loved this. He was telling Lily a story. Elena could not hear the words through the window, but she knew it was a Catherine story because Richard always gestured with his left hand when he talked about his wife, as if he was trying to draw her in the air. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. It said, "Have you seen this?" Attached was a link to an article. The headline read, "Cole and Associates wins landmark ruling in cryptocurrency asset concealment case." Vanessa had opened her own law firm 6 months after the trial. She specialized in financial abuse cases and family law, representing women whose husbands had hidden assets, manipulated courts, or used wealth as a weapon. The firm was called Cole and Associates, with the tagline, "Because nobody gets erased." Elena was on the advisory board. Their first pro bono case had been a teacher in the Bronx whose ex-husband had hidden $2 million in cryptocurrency during their divorce. They won. Elena texted back, "I saw it. I am so proud of you." Vanessa replied, "I learned from the best," meaning you, not Patricia. "Do not tell Patricia I said that." Elena laughed and set down the phone. She had gone back to nursing, not at Mount Sinai, although they had offered her a position with a formal apology and a significant salary increase. She had declined. Instead, she worked 3 days a week at a community health center in Stamford that served uninsured and underinsured patients. She did not need the money, the settlement, the properties, and the trust that Richard had restructured meant that Elena and Lily would never want for anything. But Elena knew what it felt like to sit in a waiting room with water-stained ceiling tiles and 2-year-old magazines, watching the clock and wondering if anyone would help you. She had been that person. She would never forget being that person. And as long as she could hold a stethoscope and write a prescription, she was going to make sure that person saw a familiar face when they looked up from the plastic chair. She also ran a weekly workshop at the health center. Financial literacy and legal rights for women leaving abusive relationships. She taught women how to read a lease, how to open a bank account in their own name, how to recognize the signs of financial control, and where to go for help. The workshop was free. It was always full. Grant Davenport was convicted 8 months after the divorce was finalized. The United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York brought charges of federal tax fraud related to offshore asset concealment and trust fund manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. The forensic audit that Patricia had initiated during the divorce proceedings uncovered a network of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and the British Virgin Islands that Grant had used to shelter approximately $47 million from federal taxes over a period of 6 years. He was sentenced to 3 years. He served 22 months at a federal minimum security facility in Otisville, New York. Upon release, he moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Morristown, New Jersey, and took a position as a mid-level financial consultant at a regional investment firm. It was a long way from the corner office on the 42nd floor of Davenport Capital. He had supervised visitation with Lily once a month at a neutral facility in White Plains. The visits were monitored by a court-appointed supervisor. Elena allowed them, not for Grant, not because she believed he had changed or that he deserved access to the daughter he had tried to erase. She allowed them because Lily deserved the chance to know her father, even if her father had not yet earned the right to know her. Grant was quiet during the visits. He held Lily awkwardly, the way a person holds something fragile that they are afraid of breaking. He did not know how to talk to her. He did not know her favorite food, which was blueberries, or her favorite book, which was the one with the caterpillar, or that she laughed with her whole body the way her grandmother used to. He was learning, slowly. Elena watched through the two-way glass and did not feel anger. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt something closer to indifference, which surprised her, because she had expected to feel more. But the truth was that Grant Davenport occupied very little space in her mind anymore. He was Lily's father. That was a fact. It was not a feeling. Brittany Cole had disappeared from public life almost entirely. After the gala photographs went viral, her remaining sponsors dropped her. The clothing line, B. Cole Luxe, was discontinued when the manufacturer terminated the licensing agreement. She deleted her Instagram account, then reactivated it, then deleted it again. She moved back to Columbus, Ohio, to live with her parents. She started a podcast called Second Chances that was about personal growth and resilience and had, as of the last time anyone checked, 47 subscribers. Nobody in Greenwich remembered her name. Jessica Warren published her memoir 8 months after the trial. It was called The First Mrs. Davenport, and it told the story of her 18-month contract marriage to Grant in unflinching detail. The dedication page read, "To Elna Marsh, the woman who finished what I was too afraid to start." The book spent 11 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Netflix optioned the rights. Jessica donated 10% of the proceeds to Vanessa's firm. Patricia Calloway delivered the keynote address at the American Bar Association's annual conference the following spring. Her topic was the weaponization of wealth in family court proceedings. She used the Marsh versus Davenport case as her primary example. The ruling established new legal precedent in New York State regarding the enforceability of marital contracts signed under financial duress without independent legal counsel. 3 other states cited the precedent within the first year. Thomas Whitfield, the hospital administrator who had fabricated the charges against Elena, was terminated from Mount Sinai after an independent investigation confirmed that he had altered electronic medical records at the request of Douglas Davenport. His healthcare administration license was suspended. He was charged with falsification of business records in the second degree, a misdemeanor under New York law, and pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to community service and 3 years of probation. He was also named in a civil suit brought by 2 other healthcare workers who alleged that he had engaged in similar misconduct in their cases. Douglas Davenport, Grant's uncle, resigned from the Davenport Capital Board of Directors after the wire transfer to Whitfield was made public. He was not charged criminally, as the evidence was insufficient to prove direct conspiracy, but his reputation in the Greenwich business community was destroyed. He sold his house in Darien and moved to Palm Beach, where he played golf alone. Eddie, the doorman at the Davenport building on the Upper East Side, quit his job 6 months after Elena was thrown out. He had worked there for 11 years. He had opened doors for celebrities, politicians, and 3 different families who had made and lost fortunes. But he could not stop thinking about the night he stood behind his desk and watched a pregnant woman carry her own suitcases past him while he stared at the floor. He wrote Elena a letter. It arrived at the Greenwich estate in a plain white envelope with no return address. The letter read, "Dear Mrs. Marsh, I am sorry I did not say anything that night. I stood there, and I watched, and I did not do a single thing to help you. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us. I think about that night a lot. I hope you and the baby are doing well. I hope you know that we knew. Everyone in that building knew what was happening, and none of us said a word. That is something I have to live with. Sincerely, Eddie Morales. Elena framed the letter. She hung it in the hallway of the Greenwich house, next to the plaster cast of Lily's handprint and a photograph of Richard holding Lily in the hospital on the day she was born. It was a strange collection of objects to hang on a wall. A letter from a doorman, a baby's handprint, a photograph of an old man holding a new life, but Elena thought they told a story. Not a story about money or revenge or justice, a story about the moments when people choose to stand up and the moments when they do not, and how the difference between those two choices can change everything. On a Saturday afternoon in June, 18 months after the gala, Elena was sitting in the garden watching Lily take her first real steps. Not the assisted, held by the hand steps that Richard claimed to have witnessed 3 weeks ago, but that no one else had seen. Real steps, unassisted. 4 of them, on the grass beside the rose garden, before she tumbled onto her diaper-padded bottom and looked up at her mother with an expression of pure astonishment. Elena clapped, Lily laughed. Richard, who was sitting on Catherine's bench with a cup of tea and a book he had not been reading, stood up so fast that he spilled the tea on his trousers and did not notice. "She walked," he said. "Elena, she walked. I saw," Elena said. "I was right here. We need to call someone. We need to tell someone. We can tell Vanessa when she comes for dinner tomorrow. This cannot wait until tomorrow. This is the most important thing that has ever happened." Elena laughed. She laughed the way she had started laughing over the past year. Freely, without surprise, like a woman who had gotten used to the sound of her own happiness. Richard sat down on the grass next to Lily. He was 69 years old, and his knees protested audibly. But he sat down anyway, because his granddaughter had just walked, and that was the kind of event that required being at ground level. Lily looked at him. She reached out and grabbed his finger. She said her favorite word. "No," she said. Richard looked at Elena. "She means yes. She always means yes. She is just testing boundaries." Elena shook her head and smiled. She looked at the garden. Catherine's roses were in full bloom, red and white and pink, climbing up the stone wall that bordered the east side of the property. The swing Richard had built swayed gently in the breeze. The brass plaque on the bench caught the afternoon light. She thought about the girl on the sidewalk.